Into week 2 of the fantasy football season, here's a few quarterbacks you should drop off your roster. The first guy is Ryan Fitzpatrick of the Washington football team. So Fitzpatrick, another season, another team here. But unfortunately, he went down with a pretty bad hip injury that he's going to expect to miss 6 to 8 weeks is Fitzpatrick. So Heinicke's going to be the next quarterback up here for this Washington football team. And Fitzpatrick, we know he's a gunslinger. People thought he was going to have a decent season this year with a pretty decent offense with Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, and Antonio Gibson. But obviously, that's not going to be the case. He's up there in age, and hip injuries are no joke, no doubt about it. So right now, he suffered a hip subluxation here after getting slammed in that ball game versus the Los Angeles Chargers was Fitzpatrick. So he finished the game with only 13 passing yards and 2 rushing yards. He left it very early in the first quarter. And right now, he's owned in 42% of fantasy leagues. But he's a quarterback I wouldn't stash on my IR or injured list spot here is Fitzpatrick. I think it's better off dropping him. And there's many options that emerged in week 1 of players I mentioned in my waiver wire video for quarterbacks to get. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out. If you have a Fitzpatrick or some other quarterbacks you want to get rid of off your roster, but Fitzpatrick's definitely a drop option this week. The next quarterback I would look to drop is his former teammate of the Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa. So Tagovailoa week 1 versus the New England Patriots. The Dolphins pulled out the ball game and got the victory, but a mediocre line it was for Tua. 202 passing yards and a touchdown, interception, 1 rushing yard and a rushing touchdown. So that second touchdown definitely saved Tua's day with a fake handoff, taking himself type of run play it was for Tua. And he finished the day with 19.18 point fantasy points. So that's not a great day. Nowadays, you see these quarterbacks going for big yards. And Tua here versus a pretty decent Patriot defense, I'll give it. He didn't have the greatest of games, but I don't think he's going to be a great fantasy option this season. And next week, it's another tough matchup versus a division rival, the Buffalo Bills, who really could get to the quarterback, really can make plays. And next week, he's not a recommended player to be on your team or start as well. So right here, I think Tua is a decent drop this week. And the third and final quarterback I would look to drop this week's Matt Ryan of the Atlanta Falcons. So Matt Ryan, he looked good in the first quarter of that game versus the Philadelphia Eagles. But then after that, it was a very pedestrian and tough offense to watch here for this Falcon team. So Ryan finished that ball game in week 1 with only 164 passing yards and 2 rush attempts for 8 yards. So obviously he's missing Julio Jones. Now teams could definitely zero in on Calvin Ridley and try to shut down Kyle Pitts as well. And that's what the Eagles did in this game. A lot of good defense in this game by the Eagles. They shut down the 2 main targets, and they tried to have Matt Ryan beat him, hitting other guys who Mike Davis out of the backfield. And this is how I think a lot of teams are going to play the Falcons this season. Take Pitts and Ridley out or limit them from having big ball games. And next week, it's a tough matchup here for Matt Ryan and the Falcons at the Tampa Bay Bucks in week 2. So right here, I can't trust him after I thought he was going to have a good game versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Next week, it gets tougher at Tampa Bay. And right now, he's a player you easily could drop, and he's owned in 73% of fantasy leagues. But the quarterbacks on waivers, I think, have a better chance of having a good fantasy game in week 2 if you're in a pinch. So that's a few quarterbacks I would look to drop here heading into week 2 of the fantasy football season.